Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar, if I could talk today, and get some fabulous swag at patreon.com/The Bitter Truth and make your life better. Today, I'm very excited. We have a friend of the show returning with us to talk about some stuff. And he is the host of the Loud and Clear podcast, which runs Monday through Friday. And he's also been a former CIA officer. He was a Pakistani station chief specifically. We're going to get into that in a little bit as well, I'm sure. And he was also one of the first whistleblowers that President Obama put in jail. And if you know that fabulous track record, you know he was a busy, busy boy compared to his predecessors. The great John Kiriakou is with us. How are you, John?
Hey, doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on again, man. Hey, so you know, busy time, but I know specifically we wanted to kind of jump into what's been going on lately with Julian Assange. I know he just won a press freedom award, right?
Yes, he did. He won a press freedom award that was very well deserved, in my opinion. You know, there's this debate about whether or not Julian is a journalist, and I think that's the wrong question. The question is he a publisher? And he's clearly a publisher. And if you're going to prosecute a publisher, it's a slippery slope to prosecuting and punishing anybody else involved in reporting the news.
But still, even as a journalist, though, he's still afforded a press freedom regardless if he's a publisher or journalist, right?
Yeah, that's right. But you know, people get tied up on these labels, and they say, "Well, he's not a real journalist. What newspaper does he work for? What website does he work for?" That's not the issue at all. The issue is that he's working to bring us truth.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the thing too that it's actually pretense, because I remember when he was when he had exposed Bush era war crimes when Bush was president. Not too long after that, he got his own TED Talk. And I'd seen that TED Talk a few times. And, you know, the so-called liberal audience is breathlessly, you know, applauding. And, oh, my God, he's a hero. Well, then he turned his attention to the Obama administration, specifically, you know, later with Hillary Clinton. And those very same people are like, oh, he's a traitor. He's not even a journalist. And I'm like, well,
right.
I was a comedian for a long time. I played in a band. I never got a license for those things. I just got on stage and I was a comedian, right? You know, or at least I was attempting to be. And I was a musician for a long time, didn't get a license. You know, it's like this, you go to journalism school, what the hell does that mean? You don't actually get a license. It's like you stick your head out the window and whatever truth is happening that day, you pretty much write that as best you can. I mean, these labels really just irk me.
Yes. Oh, I totally agree.
So,
and we're always hung up on labels, you know, it seems, especially in Julian's case, and it's become more bipolar, I guess, with very few people in the middle on this issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I mean, it's all labels too. It's all identity politics. You know, like you know, not to get into these weeds, but you see it all the time. If Tim Allen says something, the conservatives are like, "Oh my God, he's an American." And then Brad Pitt says something,
exactly.
You know, then they lose their shit because Brad Pitt said something about the hearings. And I don't agree with either one of them, but it's like it really just depends on the flavor. You know, it's like, well, why should Brad Pitt shut up on his opinion, but you breathlessly accept what Tim Allen has to say, right? And then
exactly right.
Let me ask him before he got dragged out of the embassy, and you may have mentioned this before, and I apologize. Had you ever spoken with him before? Because I know you know Ed Snowden, but had you ever spoken with him before?
The only time I ever spoke with Julian was about 6 weeks before he was pulled out of the embassy. We've exchanged a few letters since he's been locked up in Belmarsh prison, but when he was in the embassy, we only spoke the one time.
Wow! And then what did you gather his state to be? When you spoke to him last?
Frightened.
Yeah.
When we exchanged letters for the first time, let me think. It was about, I'm going to say 10 months ago. It was very clear that he was a man in command. He made a long list of things that he wanted me to do. Could I call this attorney? Could I ask these questions? Could I call this activist? Could I introduce him to such and such a journalist? That kind of thing. It was a page and a half of that, and it was very action oriented. And then by the third or fourth letter that we exchanged, he was frightened and worried.
He knew that
Because,
he knew Moreno
I'm
was going
sorry,
to pull his. He knew Moreno was going to pull his shit, right? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like the fact that the fix is in was finally sinking in.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that the fix is not in. I think that there's a possibility, certainly, that cooler heads can prevail. And once word gets out as to the illegal actions that the CIA and NSA and others took against him in order to spy on him, for example, when he was in the embassy,
Mm-hmm.
That may be helpful.
Okay, well, let me ask you something. I got kind of a laundry list of a shit ton of really good international laws that I think are broken. But let me ask you honestly. So, before all this, before the pulling out of the embassy, before Lenin Moreno even won the election, did he think he'd have a shot at actually being free again, or was he kind of relegated to being in the embassy?
I think deep down he believed that there was a chance that he would go free eventually. He thought he could outweight Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump said a lot of nice things about WikiLeaks. And then it became apparent that Donald Trump wasn't going to help him in any way. And he thought, well, he's going to have to outweight Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, he was thinking, I didn't do these sexual assaults. The cops put these women up to filing the complaints in the first place. Once that sort of worked its way to the wayside, that maybe there was a chance through the British courts that he could get out. Maybe he could get to Iceland. Maybe he could get to Russia or something like that. And it just didn't happen.
Well, and
then Lenin Moreno,
okay.
I think we were all shocked at Lenin Moreno's response to this whole problem.
Well, yeah, because he wasn't Lenin Moreno wasn't some guy that just fell out of the sky. He was in the previous administration. He was the VP in that, or whatever.
Yeah, and my God, his name's Lenin, for heaven's sake.
Well, yeah, one would
you wouldn't
think.
expect somebody whose name's Lenin to be in the pocket of the CIA.
You're right,
and that's exactly what he was.
Yeah, and that's the thing where when Correa left, I was just like, all right, well, this guy's going to take over. But see, that's one of the questions I wanted to start off with is this trial that's happening. I believe it's this spring for Julian Assange. Aren't they? The trial is to see if the British government is going to extradite him to the United States,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Correct. And keep in mind that he had been held on charges of bail jumping, right?
Right.
And he was sentenced to more than the maximum.
Right.
He was sentenced to 10 months, which is longer than the maximum sentence for bail jumping. And then when he finished that sentence, they just said, oh, we're not letting you out because we think you're going to run away. So you just have to remain here indefinitely in this maximum security penitentiary, by the way.
Right.
He's not in the minimum
county
security
jail.
camp.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, they put him in solitary confinement.
Well, see,
and we know what solitary confinement is. It's a form of torture.
Well, and bail jumping for a case that's been dropped 3 times.
Exactly.
It's not new charges. It's bail jumping for something that the Swedish government had dropped 3 times already.
That's right. That's right. And I'll tell you what worries me the most. Well, let me preface it by saying that there are precedents, plural, for British courts refusing to extradite subjects to the United States because of the way the U.S. uses solitary confinement. It is an internationally recognized form of torture. Mm-hmm. And so British courts in the past have refused to extradite people to the United States. It is conceivable that a British judge could refuse to extradite Julian. But what would happen then? Since there are no charges pending against him in the UK,
right,
he would have to be released from Belmarsh, and then he would be expelled because he is an Australian national, and the Australian government went to pains about a year ago to renew his passport. He would be expelled to Australia, and then the U.S. would ask Australia to extradite him. So, there's no easy fix to this, not at all.
Well, and then I was going to ask you. I got a couple of other guys I wanted to talk to you about really quick. Most recently, Glenn Greenwald just got his charges dropped on that cyber stalking crap they tried to accuse him of. But with Julian Assange, and this is me being ignorant. I'm asking just to ask. Was the Ecuadorian government revoking his citizenship without cause? Is that illegal? Because that just seemed hokey when they did it.
It's funny. Well, I don't know specifically what Ecuadorian law is, but I just asked the same question of another country that happens to be an EU country, and I just got a formal response from the embassy today, and they said that it is not legally possible to revoke citizenship, that the citizenship has to be renounced. It can't be revoked.
Oh.
So Ecuador is not a European Union country, of course, but I would have to assume that there was similarity from country to country.
Sure. And then going into the embassy, I know, Moreno gave the Brit police the permission to go into the embassy.
Yes.
But is that the only way? Is that illegal anyway? I mean, is there? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Technically, that would be legal. A foreign power, including a local power like the police, can only go into an embassy with the express permission of that country's leadership.
Okay.
It's the only way that it can be done.
Okay. Well, and last year when he was first put in a Belmarsh, and then they kept dragging him, not even dragging him, they did. They would drag him out and let him talk for 10 seconds, give his name and date of birth or something. But they're basically trying him without even I don't know if they're doing it now, but last year they didn't even let him look at his prepared defense. They didn't let him talk to his attorneys. They gave his attorneys evidence that they'd asked for 10 minutes before the hearings. I mean, it was a total kangaroo court. Is there a recourse they can go to? I mean, this isn't the British Supreme Court or their version of it, is it? It's like a circuit court judge that's doing this. And isn't she married to somebody?
This is a magistrate. Yes, you're right. So there are several levels above this current judge that they can go. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken with most of his attorneys over the past year. Okay. He has the best attorneys that money can buy, both in the UK and in the United States. So we can all be assured that he's got some of the best legal minds supporting him. With that said, they have one hand tied behind their backs because they're not receiving discovery in a timely fashion. That's one of the reasons why these hearings keep being postponed. Now, there's a hearing later this month. I'm going to go to London in a couple weeks to attend. It's going to be short. It's going to be, short relatively. It's going to take about 4 days. And then there is a hearing in May that's scheduled for 2 weeks, and that's supposed to be the whole hearing with testimony and exhibits and everything, with the result being either extradition or no extradition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, shoot. I mean, but then this is the thing that frustrates me is the magistrate who's married. Her husband, has not benefited, but her husband has been a quote on the receiving end of some of Julian Assange's exposures. Shouldn't she be recusing herself? Why? I
would say yes.
Right,
and I would say absolutely yes.
I don't know what Brit law means, as far as that goes, but here in America, if that was to go down, if you were being tried, in your case. For example, if the judge turned out to have been married to someone who worked on the Obama campaign, they would have to recuse themselves.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what I would be calling for, is a recusal.
And does Britain have that kind of a law? Do you know? I don't know.
You know what? I don't know. Okay. I don't know.
Okay.
But certainly, I mean, this is a country that's been purportedly governed by the rule of law for 800 years now?
The Magna Carta.
Almost.
Stuff like that.
From the Magna Carta, right. Mm. And so the rest of the world ought to be looking to them for these kinds of issues, rather than us saying, what's up with this conflict of interest? This isn't cool.
Well, what is the legal U.S. right to extradite? I mean, it's not like he killed somebody on U.S. soil and then fled to Britain.
That's really the $64,000 question. Does the U.S. have a legal right to ask for his extradition? He's not an American citizen. And here's another thing. A precedent was set in my case, a very dangerous one, but it was a great expansion in the definition of espionage. So, the definition of espionage in the U.S. Code goes on for pages. My judge made it this, and I quote her exactly. Espionage is the provision of any national defense information to any person not entitled to receive it. Okay? So she didn't say anything about criminal intent. She didn't say anything about the First Amendment. It's just the provision of national defense information to any person not entitled to receive it, which means under that definition that any journalist, let's say from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, can be charged with espionage for publishing information that someone gave him or her that's still classified, and they used it in a news story. Anybody. So until my case, it was, you had to have a criminal intent to expose this information. The information had to be currently and properly classified, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Julian was not subject to U.S. law demanding that he protect U.S. defense information, classified information. He was under no obligation to protect classified information. So why prosecute him in the first place? Even the prosecution itself doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, no, and then to speak to your point, he didn't give that information to an enemy, unquote. He simply published it.
Yes, but they argue that he gave it to an enemy by publishing it. And they argue that he exposed it to the likes of the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans, et cetera.
Okay. Well,
that's part of their
and they still couldn't prove any harm.
Well, that's another thing. They couldn't prove any harm in my case, in Tom Drake's case, even in Chelsea Manning's case. Chelsea Manning turned over hundreds of thousands of pages of classified documents, and they were never able to prove that there was any harm to the national security.
It'd be so much easier if we quit fucking around with people, I think.
Wouldn't it though?
Right. It's like, it'd be nice if we spent, $50 billion a year to give people water, and then no one would want to kill us because they'd be like, oh, hey, they're the water guys. They're cool.
Exactly right.
And
you know what? Just as an aside, that's how people view the Chinese in the third world. If you go to Yemen or Somalia, Djibouti, I've been to all these countries in the Eastern Horn of Africa, and they love the Chinese. Why? Because the Chinese come and build roads, and they don't try to politicize them. They don't jump up and down about taxes or human rights or military bases or any of that stuff.
No.
They just build roads.
In fact, the Chinese only have 2 bases outside of China.
Right.
2.
That's right.
And they just upped their military budget spend to $225 billion.
Yeah, our military budget spend is more than the next 8 largest countries combined.
Oh, yeah. And forget what the Congress just passed. I read, Forbes has published this a few times, where it's closer to $1.2 trillion, $1.1 trillion a year when you throw in covert, VA, and the news. Right. And we keep going and going and going. And then, but I wanted to kind of, while we still have time with you, because kind of along the same lines, Max Blumenthal just had his charges dropped about a month ago, and just yesterday, Glenn I can't even speak today. Glenn Greenwald just had his cyber spying charges or whatever dropped in Brazil, which kind of shocked me because Bolsonaro is not exactly a friend of the journalist. But and can you speak to those 2 situations?
Sure. I'm happy to. They're both friends of mine. Max Blumenthal. Wow, poor Max. Max was accused of assaulting a woman in front of the Venezuelan embassy. In fact, video showed that it was Max who was assaulted. He never raised his hand to anybody, a woman or otherwise. He was clearly assaulted. The police did nothing about it. And then weeks later, they carried out a SWAT-like raid on his house at 6 o'clock in the morning, with the black helmets and flak jackets and the AR-15s or whatever. I think it's an AR-15 that the D.C. police use. They raided his house because someone had written on the arrest warrant that he was to be considered armed and dangerous. So it's a miracle that they didn't just open fire when they broke down the door and went into the man's home.
Sure.
Those charges were dropped because he simply hadn't done what they said he did. The same day, Medea Benjamin was arrested, and she was arrested for allegedly assaulting Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That was outrageous.
But I would have liked. But I would have
were
liked.
dropped.
I would have liked to have seen that. Though.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. And then there was Glenn Greenwald. You know, Glenn's made a lot of people angry over the years. A lot of very, very important people, including Jair Bolsonaro.
Right.
You know, the reason why I'm less sanguine about Glenn's safety is that the Minister of Justice did not want to drop this case. The Minister of Justice was ordered to drop it by one of the judges on the Brazilian Supreme Court.
Oh.
And even when they dropped the charge, they still sort of threatened him in their reasoning for dropping the charge. And so if I were Glenn, I would be very careful in Brazil. Brazil is trending fascist, and the journalists are going to be the first ones to go.
Well, I mean, my mother's from Brazil, and so I mean, me and my brothers are all first generation here. My dad's Palestinian, my mother's Brazilian, so we're a hot mess. But the Lula da Silva days were short and fairly recent. You know what I mean? Up until da Silva, Brazil had a lot of these kinds of problems before. You know, like pretty much from '64 on, and so
yes,
yeah, you know, and so when da Silva came, it was sort of like a Bolivarian, reform. But it wasn't long before, they jailed him and pulled all the John Perkins type crap that you read about, and we saw it in real time. And with Glenn Greenwald, the thing that makes me a little nervous about him, and his husband's a congressperson in Brazil.
Yes.
So it's not like they can just up and leave. And then where is he? And the other question too is, where is he going to go?
Right.
It'd have to be somewhere like Portugal or somewhere where while it's an EU country, they don't bend over to the will of the Brits in the United States. I mean, what do you think of that?
I was having a conversation about this very issue last night with a friend of mine, and I said, "What about Iceland? I mean, Iceland's always been so friendly with people in this these circles, let's say."
Right.
And Iceland was willing to take Ed Snowden. Snowden just couldn't get there.
Right.
And so she said, no, that Iceland has changed. Iceland has been refusing requests for asylum by activists. They're not interested in taking Glenn Greenwald or Ed Snowden or anybody else that might cause them a political problem.
Mm. Well, and it's a country of 500,000 people too. It's not like that,
right.
You know what I mean? It's not like they've got this, incredible military and that kind of thing either. It's like, if we, look what we've been doing with international law the last 20 years. We kind of don't give a shit. And I could see us actually invade Iceland to go get somebody. You know what I mean?
Oh yes.
And the buy-in would be pretty easy. I mean, the other night they just gave Juan Guaido a standing ovation. And, he's
at the State of the Union.
He's the recognized president of Venezuela. Like, no, he's not.
No, he's actually not.
Dipshit. He didn't even win an election in his own little deal. And you only got, 40? There's how many countries in the world? 200? And only 40 are puppets recognize this guy?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And it's such a white person thing, too. Because, I mean, when the Bolivia thing happened last fall, I'm here in Austin, supposedly super blue Austin. And
right.
I'm at a party with a couple of buddies, and that came up. And my one friend, he's like, well, I'm not saying it was right, but he was there for a long time. He was there for 15 years. I go, well, Angela Merkel's been running things for 15 years. How come we don't pull a coup in Germany?
Yeah, right.
Well, because she's white.
It's true.
We don't like.
I agree.
We don't like the black.
You don't want to.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Funny thing too that I noticed when John Bolton was still the national security advisor, a reporter asked him about the Venezuelan constitution because Bolton had said that Guaido, according to the Venezuelan constitution, Guaido had every right to be president. And the reporter said, but the Venezuelan constitution says that you have 30 days in which to take the oath of office and to begin governing from the date of your election. He wasn't elected, but he was, but it's been more than 30 days since the coup, so he's no longer constitutionally eligible to be president. And Bolton just stood there and stared at the guy like nobody had ever bothered to read the Venezuelan constitution to see if even the illegality of their coup could somehow be massaged to make it look like it was okay for Juan Guaido to be president.
This is American
They look like fools.
This is American exceptionalism. I swear to God, Bolton didn't know that. That was a gotcha question. You're going to lead a coup in a country and you don't even know what the fucking law is. That's what these people do.
Exactly.
That's what these people do.
Exactly right.
You know, and it's I mean, like I said, my dad's Palestinian, right? I don't have an emotional dog in this fight at this point in my life, but on a justice level, I do. I mean, it's the same goddamn thing as Bolivia or Nicaragua or anywhere else. And when people with a straight face tell me, well, Zionism is great, I'm like, really? Really? That blows my mind that you would say those words in that way. I mean, if I said Nazis are awesome, what kind of response would I get? I mean, you're shooting 6-year-olds in the back from 100 yards away with a sniper rifle.
Yeah, they are.
You know what I mean? And when they go on about, well, they launched rockets, what, volleyballs full of gunpowder? I mean, you know, what kind of rockets they got in Gaza? Yeah,
right.
You know, and how many? And so far, the Israelis have killed 2.1 million Palestinians in the last 70 years. Okay.
Right.
Not all of them are PLO. Not all of them are Hamas or Hezbollah. And I'm sorry, if it wasn't for goddamn Hezbollah, Lebanon would have been annexed by now.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. So it's just that kind of thing just drives you. And so-called liberals do it too. Like we were talking about earlier with Tim Allen versus Brad Pitt. You know, it's
right.
They do that too. I mean, even Bernie Sanders can't even bring himself to say that it was a fucking coup. You know, he's like, well,
it's true.
You know what I mean? He couldn't even say, well, they need election reform. No, they don't need election reform, dude. He won.
No. Well, AOC was one of the members of Congress that stood up and gave a standing ovation to Juan Guaido at the State of the Union.
Yeah. Yeah. All of them did. I didn't see anybody sit down.
Yeah, they did.
You know, and you're giving me this, they need election reform. And then I got people with a straight face. This is the one thing that pisses me off when I hear people bitch about Trump supporters. And they'll say, well, you know, most of them aren't educated and they don't have a degree. I got a degree for all the jack shit it means. And let me tell you something. I know a lot of people with degrees who are fucking stupid.
Yep.
To sit there and use that as a measure of any intelligence blows my mind, especially when you buy the news hook, line, and sinker like these guys do. If Rachel Maddow says it, then it must be true.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, listen, man. Let me let you do your thing really quick. You know, I appreciate the time. We're getting close to the end here, but so where can we find your podcast? And did I said Monday through Friday? I've heard it before, but I listen on YouTube, so I don't always catch it live. Like
yeah. So it's called Loud and Clear with Brian Becker. We do it Monday through Friday.
It's Monday. Okay.
It's on terrestrial radio here in the Washington area and also in Kansas City. But it's available as a podcast at iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Spotify, all the various platforms. Loud and Clear with Brian Becker.
Okie dokie. Yeah. And I'll put that, and I'll also put that in the link in the body of the show too. Hey, John, seriously, appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on. And folks, again, our guest has been John Kiriakou, and you can again visit us on patreon.com/thebittertruth. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.